Hi, I'm Ellen from the Chili Dog. I'm knitting a pair of crab walk socks, and today I'm going to demonstrate how to purl the first stitch after a needle change when you're working a small circumference project like socks, mittens, or gloves. For whatever reason, maybe because it's just not something we frequently do, purling that first stitch can tangle knitters up. It feels awkward, and you may end up with an extra unwanted stitch right there. But if you take it slow and practice, before long you'll be purling that first stitch with ease. The overall process is going to be the same no matter which style of needles you prefer to use for small circumference projects. DPNs, flexible DPNs like I'm using today, two circular needles, or the magic loop method. However, things do look slightly different depending on whether you're an English or continental knitter. So today I'll show you how to do both. Let's get started. Before we begin, if you enjoy our videos, consider joining the pack and becoming a member of thechilidog.com for ad-free access to our entire learning library, priority support, and more. I'm working in the round English style, so my yarn is tensioned and managed with my right hand. I just knit my last stitch, and the yarn is currently at the back. I'll rotate my work so I can continue knitting on my next needle. And if this first stitch were a knit, the yarn would already be positioned correctly, and I could just insert my needle tip into the next stitch knitwise and continue on. But my pattern calls for the next stitch to be a purl. Before I introduce a new needle, I'm going to set that down for a second. I want to position my yarn so that I'm ready to purl. And I do that by bringing the yarn forward between the needle tips. Generally, I let go of my yarn right here with my right hand and hold it in place with my left thumb so things don't get away from me. Then I'm going to insert my new needle tip above this working yarn and into the next stitch purlwise, retension my yarn in my right hand, and then purl that first stitch. And then I can continue on in my pattern. It's really important that as your needle tip is inserted into that first stitch, that you are positioned with the needle over the yarn as it goes through the first stitch to purl, and not under the yarn as you go through the first stitch to purl. If your needle tip is under the yarn, that's when you have a problem and create that extra yarn over. Now, if I purl my stitch and bring the yarn through, you can see I get that extra yarn over that I don't want. So it's really important that as you are working that first stitch, your needle has to be above the working yarn when it enters the first stitch. Now I'm working in the round continental style, and my yarn is tensioned and managed with my left hand. I just knit my last stitch, and my yarn is currently at the back. I'll rotate my work so that I can begin knitting on the next needle. And if that first stitch were a knit, my yarn would already be positioned correctly, and I could just insert my needle knitwise and continue on. But again, my pattern calls for this first stitch to be a purl. Before I introduce the new knitting needle, I'm going to position my yarn to purl by bringing it forward and between the needles. Then I like to bring my index finger forward to hold this yarn forward and out of the way. Insert the new needle tip over the working yarn, purlwise through the stitch, and then I can purl that first stitch. And then continue on in my pattern. Just like before, it is very important when you are inserting your needle into that first stitch, it has to be above the working yarn as you go through that first stitch purlwise. If you insert your needle under the working yarn and then purlwise and purl your first stitch, what happens is you end up with an extra yarn over there that you don't want. So as you're entering that first stitch, your right hand needle has to go over the working yarn as you insert it purlwise to make your first stitch. I hope you enjoyed learning how to purl the first stitch after a needle change when knitting small circumference items like socks. And if you did, make sure to give this video a thumbs up and share it with your knitting friends. If you'd like to try this technique in a pattern, head over to the shop section of thechilidog.com and look for my crab walk socks. Until we stitch again, happy knitting!